Sure, here's the updated chapter with Eleanor Whitmore replaced by the new name Margot Hensley. Throughout the entire story, Margot Hensley sat alone in her kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator offering the only sound in an otherwise still house. The scent of lavender tea drifted from her mug, untouched, as she stared at a calendar pinned to the wall. The date was circled in red, a bold, hopeful reminder from 3 months ago. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Her only son Marcus was getting married. A wedding was a celebration, a symbol of legacy, of families coming together, but not for her. Because as she sat there, clad in the soft gray shawl her late husband once loved, there was no invitation, no phone call, no message, nothing. Marcus had always been a quiet child, sensitive, thoughtful, reserved. After Charles, Margot's husband, died from a stroke 10 years ago, Marcus became her anchor. They shared coffee in the mornings, argued about the news, and laughed over stories from her youth. She had raised him on her own since he was 12. She had worked double shifts at the library, skipped her own meals, and quietly pawned her engagement ring during hard winters just to make sure Marcus had everything he needed. His education, his books, his dreams, they were all funded by her sacrifices. But somehow, somewhere, she had lost him. It started after he met Vivian. Vivian Langford was elegant, educated, and from money. Her father owned a chain of boutique hotels and had been featured in business magazines. Her mother, Clarice, was a socialite with an icy smile and sharp eyes that sized Margot up the moment they met. At the first dinner, Margot brought homemade pie. Vivian had ordered sushi, from the beginning. Vivian's world was one Margot couldn't understand, and evidently wasn't welcome in. She tried. At first, she invited them for Sunday lunch, gifted Vivian a hand-knitted scarf, even offered to help with early wedding planning. But each time, she was met with polite dismissal, a distant smile, and vague promises of checking the calendar. Margot convinced herself it was just stress. Weddings were hectic. People got busy. Maybe they were just trying to figure things out. Marcus never mentioned anything about excluding her. In fact, he barely mentioned the wedding at all. "We're keeping things simple," he would say, or "Vivian wants to handle most of it." He seemed distant, not cruel, just absent, like a radio slowly losing signal. Weeks passed. Then months. One day, she found out the wedding date accidentally. Her neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had heard from her niece, who worked for a catering service. "Isn't Marcus your son?" she had asked innocently. "I heard he's getting married at the Hawthorne estate next month. Big event. Quite fancy." Margot had nodded with a tight smile, pretending she already knew, but she didn't. That was when she started circling the date, a small rebellion against denial, a quiet way of telling herself, they must have made a mistake. The invitation will come. Maybe it got lost. Maybe they're planning a surprise. She even went shopping for a dress dusty lilac with delicate sleeves. She bought shoes, polished the pearls Charles had given her on their 10th anniversary. Every morning, she practiced a smile in the mirror, just in case someone called. No one did, and now, the day had arrived. She got up from her chair, walked slowly to the window, and pulled back the curtain. The sky outside was an unbothered blue, the kind of sky that weddings hoped for. In the distance, a few sparrows hopped along the garden fence. Her rose bushes were blooming, unruly but proud, like her. She had raised them with the same love and care she gave Marcus. But Marcus was gone now, like a chapter that ends mid-sentence. She picked up the wedding invitation that never came, at least, not to her. She had seen a picture of it on Vivian's cousin's Instagram weeks ago, cream-colored cardstock embossed in gold. The union of Marcus Whitmore and Vivian Langford, no mention of the groom's mother. No "with joy, we invite you," no seat reserved for her. She sat back down at the kitchen table. The untouched tea was cold now. Her eyes wandered to the family photo on the wall. Marcus, at his college graduation, standing beside her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, his smile bright and proud. She looked happy in that picture, genuinely happy, that Margot, 10 years ago, would never have imagined this future. A future where her son would treat her like a ghost. She had spent so many years giving, not just money or time, but parts of herself. She had given Marcus her youth, her laughter, her security. She had never remarried, though she had the chance. Not because she was bitter, but because she feared Marcus might feel neglected. Everything was always about making sure he felt loved, supported, understood. Asterisk Margot wasn't perfect. She could be stubborn. She worried too much. She clung too tightly. But was that enough to erase her from his life entirely? Asterisk, she walked slowly to the living room and opened the old chest by the fireplace. Inside, carefully folded, were years of memories, school drawings, report cards, birthday cards, written in crayon, even the comic book Marcus once made where she was the superhero, Supermom, he had written across the cover, complete with a red cape and T-powers. Asterisk, she smiled, sadly, then cried. Asterisk, but not the kind of cry that seeks comfort. It was the kind of cry that comes from knowing something is truly lost, that no matter how many memories you hold, they can't shield you from the cruelty of being forgotten by the one person who mattered most. Asterisk, as she sat there, hugging a threadbare baby blanket to her chest, something changed. Asterisk, it wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was quiet, cold, resolved. Asterisk, Margot stood up and walked to her desk. She pulled out a notepad and began to write. Not a letter, not a plea, a list. She wrote down the name of the venue, Hawthorne Estate. She wrote down the address. She noted the time of the ceremony. She circled that time 3 times. Her handwriting was steady, firm, as if each stroke of the pen was rebuilding her spine. Asterisk. She was no longer asking why. She was deciding what. There was power in letting go of hope. It made space for something else. Not bitterness, but something sharper. Purpose. Asterisk, Margot didn't want revenge in the way movies told it. She didn't want to crash the wedding and scream, or throw wine at Vivian. No, that would be beneath her. What she wanted was presence. To make herself undeniable. Not just to Marcus, but to everyone who had conspired to erase her. Asterisk, they thought she was weak, lonely, a mother in the background. Asterisk, but they had forgotten something important. Asterisk, she was also Charles Hensley's wife. Asterisk, and Charles, before his sudden passing, had left her not only memories but money, quiet, unspoken savings from his years in engineering contracts, and a surprise land sale that had matured handsomely. Margot had never touched it. It was for emergencies, Charles had said. Asterisk, this, she decided, qualified. Asterisk, she picked up the phone and called a number she hadn't dialed in years. It belonged to a man named Gideon Blake, an old acquaintance of Charles who managed real estate investments. Asterisk, Gideon. She said, voice steady. It's Margot. I need a favor, a big one. Do you still have contacts at the Hawthorne Estate? Asterisk, there was a pause, then a chuckle. Margot Hensley. My God, after all these years, I remember you baking scones at those company picnics. What's this about? I want to buy the venue, she said. The whole estate. Asterisk, yes. Quietly, discreetly. Today. He laughed again, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. Single quotes. T. Asterisk, by the time she hung up, her heart was thudding, not from sadness, but clarity. For the first time in years, she wasn't drifting in sorrow. She had direction. Asterisk, she would not be silenced, ignored, or erased. Asterisk, if they didn't invite her to the wedding, she would still attend, not as a guest, but as the owner of the venue. Asterisk, and from this moment forward, everything would change, because Margot Hensley had just remembered who she was. Asterisk, let me know if you want the rest of the chapters updated with Margot Hensley as well. Asterisk, the morning after Margot Hensley made the call to Gideon Blake, a strange calm settled over her. The kind of calm that often follows a storm, not because the damage is undone, but because something inside has accepted the reality. Her hands were steady now, no longer trembling with grief or the shaky anticipation of being forgotten. What had once been hope was now transformed into quiet, strategic resolve. Asterisk, she had spent the previous evening combing through paperwork, bank statements, land records, Charles's old files. All of it was there, just waiting to be used. She hadn't touched that money in over a decade, hadn't even moved it to another account. Maybe, in some subconscious way, she had always known she'd need it for something bigger. And what could be more significant than reclaiming her dignity? Asterisk, Margot hadn't slept much. Instead, she sat at the dining table, lit only by the dim pendant light above, scribbling in a leather-bound notebook. She wrote down every memory that mattered: the time Marcus broke his arm climbing the willow tree, the time he came home crying because another boy called his lunch weird, the time he fell asleep on the floor with a fever, and she stayed up all night, cooling his forehead with wet cloths. She wrote and wrote, not because she needed to remember, she couldn't forget, but because she needed to remind herself that she hadn't imagined her role in his life. Asterisk, she had been there. She had mattered. Asterisk, as the morning sun stretched across the sky, painting the neighborhood in shades of gold, Margot changed into a simple navy blue dress, pulled her hair back into a neat bun, and reached for her pearl earrings, the ones Charles gave her on their last anniversary together. She wore them like armor. Asterisk, by 10 a.m., her phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Gideon Blake. Asterisk, she answered quickly. Yes, asterisk, it's done, Gideon said, his voice efficient, almost stunned. The owners were ready to sell. Apparently, the Langfords had only rented it for the day, not the full weekend. The estate still had the right to override if a buyer made a compelling offer. Your timing was impeccable. Margot's heart thumped once, solidly, and they accepted. She asked quietly. Asterisk, they did. Papers are being couriered to your home within the hour. You'll be the official owner before their event even begins. Though fair warning, they may not realize it until someone tells them. I intend to, she said, her tone calm. Gideon hesitated. Margot, are you sure about this? I mean, this is quite a gesture. Asterisk, I'm not doing this to make a scene, Gideon. I'm doing this because my son forgot who raised him. I want him to remember, not in anger, but with truth. Asterisk, there was silence. Then Gideon said, more gently, then you've got yourself a venue, Mrs. Hensley. Asterisk, after she hung up, Margot stood by the window, watching as the courier van pulled up outside. Within moments, she was signing papers, initials, scribbled across lines of legal text. Each stroke of the pen felt like stitching a wound that had long remained open. Asterisk, when the courier left, Margot placed the documents in a neat file and tucked them into her leather handbag. She stared at the clock. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. She had 5 hours. Asterisk, she wasn't going to crash it. She wasn't going to make a scene. That wasn't the plan. But she was going to be there. Not in the shadows. In ownership. Asterisk, around noon, she took a long bath, letting the warm water soothe the ache in her joints. She dressed slowly, deliberately, in a soft plum-colored gown she had once worn to a charity gala with Charles. It hugged her frame gently, dignified and timeless. She brushed her hair out, now streaked with silver, and pinned it with a delicate clip. Her makeup was subtle but polished. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She didn't see a discarded mother. She saw a woman who had given everything in, who was now taking back her place. Asterisk, by 1:30 p.m., she was on her way. The drive to the Hawthorne estate took just under an hour. Her palms tingled on the steering wheel, not from nerves, but from anticipation. As she turned down the winding tree-lined drive that led to the estate, the sprawling gardens came into view. Rows of ivory chairs were being lined up under an arch of white roses. Staff bustled about with trays of wine glasses, linens, and crystal chandeliers being hoisted into place. Asterisk, the estate manager, a younger man named Theo, greeted her at the side entrance. Mrs. Hensley, he said, slightly out of breath. Everything is ready. Your access to the house and grounds has been activated. Staff have been informed. No one will interrupt you. Asterisk, Margot nodded. Thank you. I won't get in the way, but I will be present. Asterisk, understood, he said, holding open the ornate wooden door for her. The Langfords haven't arrived yet. The groom is expected at 2. Asterisk, inside. The estate was as magnificent as she remembered from photos. High ceilings, grand chandeliers, and antique oak furniture whispered of old money and quiet power. But now, it was hers. Every chandelier, every window, every rose in the garden. Asterisk, she walked down the hall slowly, the sound of her heels echoing off the polished floors. In one of the salons, she found a seat by the window, partly shielded by velvet curtains. From there, she could see the garden, the white arch, the rows of chairs filling with guests. She recognized no one. But that didn't matter. Asterisk, at exactly 2:15, she saw Marcus arrive. Her breath caught. He was wearing a charcoal gray tuxedo, looking handsome and well-kept. But something about him looked different, hollow maybe, like a boy wearing a man's costume. He walked with Vivian at his side. She was radiant, of course, her dress sleek and shimmering, her makeup perfect, her smile poised. Asterisk, they posed for photographs near the fountain. They laughed with guests. But not once did Marcus turn toward the house. Asterisk, did he know? Probably not. At 2:40, Margot stepped out of the salon and walked quietly through the hallway toward the main garden. A few staff members glanced at her with respectful nods, now fully aware of who she was. Asterisk, she stood just behind a tall hedge bordering the garden, watching as the final guests were seated. The string quartet began playing softly. Then, unexpectedly, a voice beside her. Mrs. Hensley. She turned. It was Clarice Langford, asterisk tall, regal, lipsticked. Her eyes narrowed. What are you doing here? She asked, trying to keep her voice down. Asterisk Margot met her gaze. Good afternoon, Clarice. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because this is my venue now. Asterisk Clarice blinked. Confused. What? No sense. I purchased it this morning. The estate changed hands. Today, your daughter's wedding is being held on my property. Asterisk Clarice's mouth parted in disbelief. She glanced toward the garden, then back at Margot, as if trying to process what had just happened. Asterisk, I'm not here to humiliate anyone, Margot continued calmly. I'm here because I deserve to be present. I won't speak. I won't interrupt. I'll stay where I'm not seen if that's what you prefer. But I will be here, and my son will know, one way or another, that I did not vanish. I did not give up. Asterisk Clarice looked ready to argue, but she paused, perhaps sensing the futility, perhaps realizing that Margot had something she couldn't fight out and resolve. Finally, she turned away, her back rigid, and marched back toward the guests. Asterisk Margot stood there for a moment longer. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble, she simply watched. Asterisk, as the ceremony began, she moved to the far side of the garden wall, where she could hear the vows but remain unseen. Her heart ached with each word, each moment she should have shared, but there was also something healing in it. She wasn't locked out, not really. She was standing exactly where she needed to be when the officiant declared them husband and wife, and the applause rang out across the estate. Margot smiled quietly to herself. Not bitter, not broken. Asterisk, she turned and walked slowly back toward the house. Asterisk, let the party begin. Let the music play. Margot Hensley had already made her entrance, and the story was far from over. Asterisk, Margot Hensley drove home in silence, the early evening sun casting long shadows over the winding road back to her quiet neighborhood. Her hands gripped the steering wheel with an odd calmness, not the shaky uncertainty of the morning, but the composed stillness of a woman who had finally taken back control of her own narrative. The wedding was done. The ceremony had played out like a scene in a movie-perfect setting. Flawless attire, smiling guests, whispered vows. And yet, behind all that beauty and orchestration, Margot had been present in the most unexpected and undeniable way. Not as a mother invited, but as the woman who owned the very ground where her son had tried to forget her. Asterisk, she had not spoken to Marcus, not even caught his eye. She hadn't needed to. Her presence, though unseen, had been woven into every moment. Every time Vivian walked across the garden, every time the photographer called for a pose near the gazebo, every moment Clarice glanced nervously over her shoulder, Margot's silent imprint hovered like a shadow of truth. She had not disrupted anything, and yet everything had changed. Asterisk's back home, the house felt warmer, though nothing had physically changed. Perhaps it was because Margot had shed the weight she'd carried for months, the weight of abandonment, of mourning a bond she thought had died. Now, she realized it hadn't died. It had simply been buried beneath years of misunderstandings, class judgments, and manipulation. Her relationship with Marcus wasn't over. It was wounded, complicated, but not gone. Asterisk, she slipped off her shoes by the front door and poured herself a glass of wine. She didn't often drink, but tonight called for something small. A private toast. She walked to the back porch, settled into the rocking chair Charles had built years ago, and looked up at the twilight sky. The stars were beginning to show, one by one, shy and shimmering. She sat there for a long time, somewhere between the second and third sip. Her phone rang. She stared at the screen. It was Marcus. Asterisk, her heart jumped. She wasn't sure what she expected. A confrontation, perhaps an apology, anger. She answered on the third ring. Hello, asterisk. There was a pause, and then a breath. Mom. Asterisk, it had been a long time since she'd heard that word from him. It came out like a question, like a boy unsure of where he stood. Asterisk, yes, she said, voice steady. Asterisk, I saw you. Asterisk, Margot closed her eyes briefly. When asterisk, before the ceremony, you were by the hedge. I thought I imagined it. I wasn't sure if you were really there, or if I wanted you to be. She didn't say anything. I found out after the vows, he continued. Vivian's mom told me you bought the venue. Asterisk yes. Asterisk why? Asterisk there was no anger in his voice, just confusion, hurt, maybe even awe. Asterisk Margot inhaled. Because, Marcus, I wasn't going to let you pretend I didn't exist. I raised you. I loved you. And I wasn't invited to one of the biggest days of your life. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to reclaim my place not in your wedding, but in the truth. You may not want me as part of your story anymore, but I am part of it. Whether anyone acknowledges it or not. There was silence on the line. Then, he whispered, I didn't know. Asterisk Margot blinked. Didn't know what? Asterisk that you weren't invited, he said, his voice cracking. I thought you didn't want to come. Vivian. She told me you were uncomfortable, that you didn't want to be involved. She said you declined. Asterisk, the breath left Margot's lungs. She sat back in her chair, stunned. Asterisk declined. She repeated. Asterisk she said, you felt like you wouldn't fit in with the guests, that it was too formal. I asked her 3 times if she'd spoken to you directly, and she said yes. Asterisk Margot gripped the armrest of the chair. The realization hit like cold water. She had been erased deliberately. Not forgotten, not neglected, but purposefully removed. Asterisk Marcus, she said, trying to keep her voice even. Vivian never spoke to me, not once. She never asked me anything. I never declined. He didn't respond. Instead, he sighed long, low, and heavy. Asterisk, she said, it was easier not to involve family, he murmured, that weddings were already complicated, and yours and her mother's energy wouldn't mix. She said you'd understand. Asterisk, I did understand, Margot said, just not in the way she hoped. Asterisk, a deep sadness settled between them. Years of miscommunication, manipulation, and distance suddenly revealed themselves like broken glass under a beam of light. Margot didn't want to hurt Marcus. She never had. But now she had to face a truth even more painful than being excluded. Her son had been convinced to exclude her, and he hadn't questioned it enough. Asterisk, I should have called you myself, he said softly. I should have made sure. Asterisk, yes, she replied. You should have. More silence. Finally, Marcus said, I'm sorry. Asterisk Margot closed her eyes. Tears gathered, but she didn't let them fall. She'd cried enough for a lifetime. Asterisk, I'm sorry too, she said. Not just for today, but for whatever I did to make you think I'd ever walk away from something so important. I may not have your world, Marcus. I may not wear designer clothes or understand the circles you move in, but I'm your mother. I gave you everything I had, and all I ever wanted was to be part of your joy. There was another long pause. Then Marcus asked, can I come over? Asterisk Margot hesitated. Her instinct was to say yes, to leap at the chance, to fold him in her arms and forgive it all. But something inside her said this needed time, not punishment. Reflection. Asterisk, not tonight, she said gently. You've had a big day, so have I. Let's let it rest for now. Give it space. He didn't protest. Okay, he said finally. But soon, she promised. After she ended the call, Margot sat in silence again. But this time the quiet felt different, not heavy with sadness, but filled with something else. Clarity, maybe, or acceptance. Or perhaps the faintest glimmer of healing. Asterisk, the next morning, she woke early and drove to the estate. Not to inspect the property, but to walk the grounds. In peace, without the chaos of the wedding, without the eyes of strangers. Just her and the earth she now owned. Asterisk, as she walked through the garden paths, her fingers grazing the blooming roses, she thought of Charles. What would he have said? He would have told her she was brave, that she was right to stand her ground, that the quiet strength she carried was the kind that built legacies. Asterisk, she paused by the gazebo. A few leftover petals still clung to the railings. She stood there a long time, remembering Marcus as a boy, how he once called her the queen of the backyard, how he used to ask for bedtime stories, insisting they always end with the hero returning home. Asterisk, she was still that hero, maybe not in his stories anymore, but certainly in her own. Asterisk, later that afternoon, Margot returned to the estate office to finalize some formalities. Theo greeted her with respect, already having heard what happened. Asterisk, you're something else, Mrs. Hensley, he said with admiration. I've been called worse, she replied with a smile. He handed her a folder. Would you like to rent out the estate? We get frequent requests for events, especially weddings. Margot considered it. Then, an idea took root. Asterisk. Let's set some guidelines, she said. Only weddings where all parents are present or, at least invited. And if they're not, I want to know why. Asterisk. Theo chuckled. You're serious. Asterisk. Dead serious, she said. I don't want this place to be a home for exclusion. I want it to be a place where stories are celebrated, not rewritten. Asterisk. He nodded. I like that. So did she. As she left the office, she glanced back at the estate. The place that had once been a symbol of pain was now her domain, a place she could shape, protect, and redefine. Asterisk. And for the first time in a long time, Margot Hensley didn't feel like a forgotten woman. She felt like the author of her next chapter. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of Margot Hensley's bedroom, painting delicate patterns across the hardwood floor. Birds chirped faintly in the background as the world outside stirred to life. But inside, Margot remained, still in bed, her thoughts spiraling into the events of the last 2 days. The wedding, the phone call from Marcus, the revelation that she had never been meant to attend it, had all left a mark, deeper than she cared to admit. Asterisk. She had told herself she was strong, that purchasing the venue had been a declaration, not a plea. But even strong women could bleed beneath their armor, and somewhere in the quiet spaces of the night, Margot had begun to feel the bruises of disappointment again, not because she regretted what she did, but because she wished it hadn't been necessary. She wished her son had seen her for who she was before it came to that. Asterisk. As she sat up, her hand brushed against Charles's old sweater, folded neatly at the edge of the bed. She held it for a moment, letting the fabric crumple between her fingers. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and thyme, a scent that always reminded her of comfort and quiet understanding. Charles had always known how to listen, and how to believe in her when she doubted herself. Asterisk. Downstairs, Margot prepared her breakfast in silence, a slice of toast, scrambled eggs, and the lavender tea she never seemed to finish. As the kettle whistled, she stared out the kitchen window at her overgrown garden. It needed tending. So did many things. Asterisk. She ate slowly, deliberately. There was no rush now, no appointments, no errands. The estate had been purchased, the legal transfers complete. The documents were tucked securely in a cabinet beneath her bookshelf. She had become a landowner, a silent force behind someone else's carefully curated day. But that chapter, though monumental, was over. What came next, what truly mattered now, was what she would do with this newfound power. Asterisk. At around 10, the doorbell rang. Margot wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart skipped slightly as she wiped her hands on her apron and made her way to the door. Asterisk. When she opened it, she found Marcus standing there. Asterisk. He looked tired, exhausted. Even the flawless tuxedo had been replaced with a simple hoodie and jeans. His hair was slightly disheveled, and dark circles tugged under his eyes. Asterisk. Hi, he said softly. Asterisk. Margot stepped aside, letting the door swing open without a word. He took it as an invitation and stepped inside. Asterisk. He glanced around, as if searching for traces of the home he remembered. His eyes lingered on the framed photos along the staircase, the antique clock on the mantel, the ceramic owl she'd once bought at a flea market. Asterisk. I don't know where to start, he said, finally looking at her. Asterisk. You already did, she replied, gesturing for him to sit. They settled into the living room, a few feet apart, both grasping for the right shape of silence. Asterisk. I didn't sleep last night, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. After we talked, I couldn't stop thinking about everything. Asterisk. Margot waited, letting him find his pace. Asterisk. I remembered when I was 13 and had that science project, he continued, the one with the solar system model. I forgot it was due and panicked, but you stayed up with me till 3 in the morning, helping me paint foam balls and glue them on wires. You even let me skip school the next day to sleep. Asterisk. I remember, she said, smiling faintly. You spilled glitter all over the carpet. Asterisk. He chuckled. Then his face sobered. Vivian's never heard that story. I realized that last night. She doesn't know most of them, and I wondered, why? Asterisk. Margot exhaled slowly. Because you stopped telling them, Marcus. Asterisk. He nodded. I did, and I didn't even notice it happening. I thought I was just moving on, growing up, building a life. Asterisk. There's nothing wrong with growing, she said. But it's a mistake to think roots don't matter. You cut them off, you lose nourishment. Eventually, the leaves wither. Asterisk. He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. Vivian didn't want to invite you because she said the day needed to be about us, that having complicated dynamics would distract from the joy. Asterisk Margot raised an eyebrow. And you believed that. Asterisk I wanted peace, he admitted, and I was tired of fighting. Asterisk Margot looked away, biting back the bitterness rising in her throat. Peace built on erasure isn't peace, Marcus. It's quiet cruelty. He nodded, shame lining his posture. Why didn't you ever come to me directly? She asked. Why not just ask how I felt? Asterisk I don't know, he said. Maybe I was afraid. Afraid you'd cry. Afraid you'd make me feel guilty. Afraid I'd see what I didn't want to see. You mean the truth, she said. Yes, he whispered. Asterisk. Margot stood and walked to the mantel, picking up a photo. It was one from years ago, her, Charles, and a much younger Marcus. His gap-toothed grin wide as he held a sparkler in each hand. Asterisk I was never perfect, she said. I got angry. I worried too much. I held on too tightly, but I was always there. Always. Asterisk I know, Marcus said. And I took that for granted. Asterisk she set the photo down and turned to him. You're married now. That means your choices affect someone else, and hers affect you. But you don't have to lose one family to start another. Asterisk I think Vivian's afraid of not having full control, he said. She likes things neat, predictable. Asterisk I'm not a threat, Margot said. I'm your mother, but I won't beg for space in your life. Asterisk he stood, walked over to her, and for the first time in years, wrapped his arms around her. She stiffened at first, unsure, then melted into the embrace, her arms circling his back tightly. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I know, she said. Asterisk they stood like that for a long time, and when they finally pulled apart, there was a quiet understanding between them, not perfect reconciliation, but the first stone laid toward rebuilding. Asterisk Vivian's at her parents' place today, Marcus said. We argued last night. She thinks what you did was theatrical. Asterisk Margot's lips curved. I'm sure she does. Asterisk she doesn't understand how much it hurt you, he said, because she doesn't know how much you mattered. Asterisk that's not my burden to fix, Margot said. It's yours. Asterisk he nodded. I'll work on it. Asterisk I hope so, she said, because I can't keep showing up in grand gestures. Next time, I want to be invited like I matter. Not because I forced the world to see me. Asterisk Marcus looked down, guilty again. Would it be okay if we started meeting, lunch, maybe once a week? Just us, talk, share stories, fill in the missing pieces. Asterisk she softened. I'd like that. Asterisk I want to rebuild things, he said. Not because I feel obligated, but because I miss you. Asterisk Margot smiled, not brightly, but with warmth. Then start with a visit next Tuesday. I'll make that soup you used to love. Asterisk the one with the garlic bread, he asked. Asterisk the very one. Asterisk he grinned. Deal. Asterisk as he left, Margot walked him to the door. He turned before stepping out. By the way, about the estate, are you keeping it? Asterisk yes, she said. It's mine now. I'll figure out what to do with it. Maybe make it into something more meaningful than a wedding backdrop. Asterisk he nodded. I think you already have. Asterisk after the door closed, Margot stood in the hallway, the echo of his steps lingering like a melody in an empty room. It had taken heartache, confrontation, and an unexpected act of defiance to remind her that she was not invisible. She was not just a side character in her son's story. She was a mother, a woman, a survivor, and she was just getting started. A quiet confidence settled into Margot Hensley's routine over the following days. The ache in her chest had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer throbbed with the sharp sting of betrayal. It had softened into something more contemplative, more rooted in reflection than regret. For the first time in months, perhaps, years, Margot felt like she had a firm grasp on her life, on her sense of identity. She was no longer clinging to the past or standing quietly on the sidelines of her own narrative. She was, in a quiet and steady way, reclaiming her place in the world she had helped build. Asterisk she spent the next morning at the estate, meeting with Theo and his team to begin conceptualizing the property's future. The land was too beautiful, too alive with possibility, to remain just a trophy of a painful moment. Margot wasn't interested in revenge or sentimentality anymore. She wanted legacy. She wanted to turn what had been a symbol of exclusion into a beacon of belonging. Asterisk the drawing room of the estate, with its tall windows and crown molding, had become her favorite space. That morning, light poured in through the panes, casting gentle golden lines across the polished floors. Theo brought her coffee and a portfolio of local vendors and planners who regularly used the estate. But Margot wasn't interested in continuing the same kind of business as before. I want this place to be more than just a venue, she said, her voice calm but resolute. I want it to mean something. Theo, attentive as always, tilted his head. What do you have in mind? She looked out the window at the rolling gardens. This place should be about family, real family, not curated perfection for magazines. I want the people who come here to feel like they're entering a space of welcome. No more pretentious guest lists, no more dividing lines. You mean something like an inclusive event center? He asked. Exactly, she nodded. I want to create a policy. Every couple who books must meet with me or someone I trust. We ask real questions, not to intrude, but to understand what their union is about. Are they including their families, or just performing an aesthetic? And if someone is being excluded unjustly, I want to help them think about that. Theo smiled. You're turning this place into a moral compass. Margot smirked. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just making sure no other mother sits in her kitchen wondering why she's not good enough. The conversation turned to renovations. The old west wing of the estate was barely used and needed refurbishing. Margot decided she'd convert it into a community room, a space for grief groups, mother-daughter brunches, retirement celebrations, life events that didn't always come with flowers and tuxedos but were worthy of celebration just the same. She left the estate feeling a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about legacy. Charles would have been proud, she thought. He had always encouraged her to do more, to not shrink into the shadows just because the world expected women like her to fade. Back home. Margot found a letter in her mailbox. A real one, handwritten, with a familiar slant. She opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. Mom, I've been thinking a lot since we talked. You were right, I let myself get carried by someone else's rhythm, and forgot my own. I forgot yours too. I'm not blaming Vivian entirely. I made choices. I stood silently when I should have spoken. I realize now that silence can hurt just as much as words. I know, we're not going to fix everything overnight. I don't expect forgiveness to come easy, and I don't want it given out of guilt. I want to earn it. I want to understand who you are now, not just who you were when you packed my lunches and sewed my costumes. I want to know the woman who stood up, bought an entire estate, and changed the narrative. That's not just strength, that's brilliance. I want that woman in my life. I need her. Love. Margot sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She read it once, then again, then once more. It didn't erase what had happened, but it was a beginning, a gesture of honesty. It reminded her of the little boy who once left her apology notes on napkins whenever he broke a lamp or forgot to do his chores. That boy, it seemed, still lived somewhere inside the man who had momentarily lost his way. Later that evening, Marcus called. They talked for nearly an hour. Not about the wedding, not about Vivian, but about old family stories. Margot told him the truth behind why she hated birds, because one had once flown into her classroom during a spelling bee and caused a scene. Marcus laughed so hard he choked on his drink. It felt easy again. Tentative, but easy. The following weekend, Marcus visited for lunch. He brought Tulips, her favorite. He didn't come with apologies this time, just presents. They cooked together like they used to. He chopped. She stirred. They talked. He showed her photos from the honeymoon. She didn't flinch. And then, toward the end of their meal, he said something that took her by surprise. Vivian wants to meet you properly this time. She said she owes you a conversation. Margot raised an eyebrow. Does she mean that? I think so. She's not used to being challenged, but she respects what you did, even if she won't admit it yet. Margot sipped her tea. Then let's give her a chance, but I'm not going to pretend I wasn't hurt. I expect honesty. She knows, Marcus said. She's willing to hear it. A week later, Vivian arrived at Margot's home. She was dressed in a cream blouse and flats, elegant, but not intimidating. She carried a bottle of wine and a cautious smile. Margot welcomed her in with the poise of someone who had weathered storms larger than awkward introductions. Asterisk, they sat in the living room. Tea between them, the air tense but civil. Asterisk, I want to apologize, Vivian said, not just for excluding you from the wedding, but for assuming I understood your place in Marcus's life better than you did. Asterisk, Margot appreciated the directness. Why did you do it? Asterisk, Vivian hesitated. I think I was scared. Scared that your presence would remind Marcus of parts of himself that I couldn't control, that I'd lose influence. I was wrong. Asterisk, Margot didn't speak immediately. She wanted the silence to settle, to test the weight of those words. Asterisk, I don't need to control Marcus, she said eventually. I raised him to be strong and independent. I don't want to own him. I just want to be part of his life, to be included. That's not too much to ask. Asterisk, it's not, Vivian admitted. And I promised to do better. Asterisk, they spoke for another hour, not warmly, but with sincerity. There were no false promises, no instant bonds, but there was civility, a willingness to try, and sometimes that was all that mattered. Asterisk, after Vivian left, Margot stood at the doorway for a while, watching the street outside. She thought of the months she had spent feeling invisible, forgotten. Now, here she was seen, respected, not because she begged for it, but because she demanded it in the quietest, boldest way. Asterisk, she was no longer the woman who waited by the phone, or sat alone in a kitchen hoping for an invitation. Asterisk, she was Margot Hensley, the owner of an estate, the author of her own piece. Asterisk, and the mother of a son who had finally remembered who she was. Asterisk, Margot Hensley stood in the middle of the old west wing of the Hawthorne estate, sunlight pouring in through high-arched windows and catching on decades of dust that floated in lazy spirals. The wing had been unused for years, left to fade into disrepair and silence. But now, as she gazed across the empty space, Margot didn't see abandonment. She saw opportunity, possibility, healing. Asterisk, she was here for more than upkeep and management. She was here to give this place a second life, just as she had given herself one. The room still had its original crown molding, though chipped and faded. The fireplace, at the far end, bore soot stains and cracked stone. But beneath the wear, the beauty waited to be unveiled. Margot placed her palm gently on the stone mantel, feeling its coldness, the way you might reach out and hold the hand of someone who'd been asleep for too long. Asterisk, this, she whispered to herself, is going to be the heart. Asterisk, she had plans, big ones, a community gathering hall, not for those with money or status, but for the ones who were always left off, the guestless widows with stories no one asked about, mothers estranged from their grown children, teenagers afraid to speak in their own homes. Margot would build a place where people could celebrate not just milestones, but existence, a space where presence itself was a victory. Asterisk, she had already made the calls. Local builders, interior designers, contractors, a team she trusted would begin work within the week. She'd sketched the first layout herself on graph paper with a ruler and pencil, old-fashioned and imperfect, but deeply personal. It included a circular central space for storytelling, alcoves for private conversation, and a long table under a row of windows for community meals. She'd named the blueprint the hearthroom, not just a renovation, a statement. Asterisk, the idea had come to her not long after her conversation with Vivian. Their meeting hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Vivian, cautious and calculating as she was, had listened. Really listened. She didn't flinch when Margot told her, bluntly, how it felt to be erased from her own son's life. She didn't cry, didn't make excuses. She only said, I didn't understand what it means to be a mother like you. Now I do. Asterisk, Margot didn't know if they'd ever be close, but that didn't matter. What mattered was honesty, and the mutual agreement to not turn away from each other again. Vivian had even offered to help with estate events in the future. It was a surprising gesture. Not forgiveness, but progress. Asterisk, Margot turned from the fireplace and walked slowly back toward the hallway, heels clicking softly against the worn floorboards. Outside, a truck rumbled down the gravel path, a delivery from the local nursery, flowers, shrubs, and climbing vines. She'd decided the estate needed not just interior repair, but exterior life. The gardens would bloom again, and they'd be open to anyone. Asterisk, as she stepped onto the front lawn, the breeze lifted the collar of her coat. She squinted against the sun, watching the workers unload the plants with care. She greeted them by name: Samina, Joel, people she had met through her outreach efforts. The estate was already becoming a place of community. She could feel it. She spent the day helping them plant. Her hands, once accustomed to books and teacups, worked easily with trowels and soil. The dirt felt grounding, the work honest. With each root she tucked into the earth, Margot felt like she was laying something permanent, not just flowers, but foundations of inclusion. At noon, Marcus arrived. He parked his car carefully by the side lot and stepped out holding a brown bag. Lunch, he called out. Margot wiped her hands and smiled. That's a first. I'm learning, he said with a grin. Turkey and brie. Don't get used to it. They sat under the newly pruned arbor at the back of the estate, eating in the shade while the workers continued their planting nearby. It was easy conversation, light, unburdened by guilt or past grievances. For the first time in years, Margot and Marcus talked not just as mother and son, but as two adults building something new. He told her about his honeymoon, how the beaches in Greece were too hot and Vivian lost a shoe to the sea. She told him about a woman who'd reached out to rent the estate for a memorial service for her mother. They laughed, they paused, and in those pauses, there was peace. Vivian's thinking about teaching yoga here, Marcus said casually. Margot raised an eyebrow. Vivian, in sweatpants. She owns a set. I've seen it, he joked. Well, I suppose everyone is welcome, Margot said, half laughing, even the ones who erase mothers from wedding lists. Low blow, Marcus said, but not unkindly. She softened. Forgiven. Mostly. He turned toward her. Seriously though, you've changed. I had to, she said. I realized I was waiting to be given space. I had to start taking it, not with anger but with purpose. He nodded. I see that now. I see you. She looked at him, really looked at him. Her son, now a husband, maybe one day a father. She saw the lines near his eyes, the weariness in his smile, but also the light that was slowly returning. You're going to be a good man, Marcus, she said, but be better than that. Be a present man. I will. Later that afternoon, after Marcus left, Margot sat in her small study on the second floor of the estate. It was a room she'd claimed for herself, a former dressing room turned library, filled now with her old books, journals, and keepsakes. On the wall hung a framed embroidery that read, "She remembered who she was, and the world did too." She pulled out her journal and began to write, something she hadn't done in weeks. She wrote not about Marcus or the estate or Viv, about herself, her voice, her worth, her future. When she finished, she took a long breath and looked around the room. She thought about the countless women like her who had given and sacrificed and quietly disappeared in the stories of others. She thought about how easy it was to be forgotten when you gave everything, but she also knew now that there was strength in remembering yourself. A knock came at the door. It was Theo. Sorry to interrupt, he said. There's someone here to see you. She says her name is Tessa Callahan. Margot blinked. Tessa, her old neighbor's niece, the one who had accidentally told her about Marcus's wedding date. She stood up and smoothed her blouse. Send her in. Tessa was a young woman with kind eyes and an apologetic smile. Mrs. Hensley, I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Margot said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I wanted to thank you, Tessa said. You don't know this, but when my aunt told me what happened, how you weren't invited, how you still showed EP, I started thinking about my own mom. We haven't spoken in a year. I thought she didn't support me, but maybe I just didn't see her clearly. Margot listened quietly. I called her yesterday, Tessa continued. We're meeting next week. Your story reminded me that mothers are more than just who we think they should be. They're who they've always been, even when we're not looking. Margot smiled, her chest tightening. I'm glad. You're changing more than just a property, Tessa said. You're changing the way people think about love. After she left, Margot sat in silence for a while. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the gardens. There were still weeds, still cracks, still repairs to make. But the estate was alive now, so was she. The day began with a soft drizzle that clung to the leaves like secrets. The Hawthorne estate shimmered beneath the rain, its stone walls glistening, its gardens a portrait of green and gray. Margot Hensley stood on the veranda with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the droplets gather on the wrought iron railing. The scent of wet earth filled the air, grounding her in a moment that felt both tender and monumental. Today was the launch of the hearthroom, the space she had dreamed into existence, crafted with care and filled with intention. It was no longer just an idea. It was real, open, alive. Inside, the hearthroom was warm with low lights and the scent of cinnamon-scented candles. The fireplace crackled softly in the background, casting shadows that danced along the freshly painted walls. On one end, a table was set with coffee, tea, scones, and trays of fruit. On the other, a long wall bore a mural of intertwined hands, in different skin tones, each hand etched with symbols of love, loss, and hope. A local artist had designed it after hearing Margot's story. It wasn't grand or loud. It was honest. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle, open, inviting, without a head of the table. Margot had insisted on that. She didn't want hierarchy, she wanted presence. People began to arrive one by one, not wealthy patrons or corporate planners, but community members. An elderly woman in a crocheted shawl who had recently lost her husband, a single father with his daughter tucked shyly beside him, a group of teen girls from the local school's storytelling club. There were no formal invitations, just word of mouth, flyers on cafe boards, and quiet curiosity. Margot greeted each person with sincerity, remembering names, offering warm smiles. She wore a deep forest green blouse and a pendant that had belonged to her mother. Her hair was loosely pinned, her eyes glowing with anticipation and peace. This was not just her event, this was her offering. At 2 o'clock sharp, she stepped to the center of the room and cleared her throat. Welcome, she began, her voice clear but soft. Thank you for coming. I won't give a speech, because today isn't about formality, it's about story, it's about space. You're not here to be impressed. You're here to be present. And I'm honored to share this space with each of you. The room responded not with applause, but with nods, small smiles, and the kind of respectful silence that spoke louder than claps ever could. She took her seat among them, not in front, but beside. That had always been the idea. Togetherness. The stories began slowly. A retired schoolteacher named Bernard spoke about losing his partner of 32 years and the silence that filled the house afterward. A woman named Nora shared how she raised 3 children on her own while working as a night cleaner at the university. No one interrupted. No one judged. People listened fully, gently. When it was Margot's turn, she hesitated. She hadn't prepared anything. She hadn't intended to speak at all, but her eyes fell on a young woman across the circle who looked so much like herself. 30 years ago we died, uncertain, alone, and suddenly the words came. I spent years waiting, Margot said, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be chosen, waiting for someone to say, you matter. I was a mother, a widow, a quiet figure in the background, and then one day I realized no one was coming to save me from that invisibility. I had to save myself, not with anger, not with revenge, but with the radical act of standing up and saying, I am still here. She paused, emotions rising, but controlled. Now this space, this hearthroom, it isn't about me. It's about all of us who've ever felt forgotten. This is where we remember ourselves. The room was still, but something electric hummed in the air. Shared recognition, collective truth. When the circle closed for the day, people lingered. Conversations continued in the corners of the room. Laughter mingled with tears. Some exchanged numbers. Others made plans to return. A few simply sat in the silence, grateful to be seen. Margot walked among them, quiet now, not needing to say more. Her presence was enough, and for the first time in years, she wasn't asking the world for permission to belong. She already did. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the staff began tidying up, Marcus arrived. He wore a simple button-down and brought with him a bouquet of gardenias. For the founder, he said, holding them out. Margot smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. They're beautiful. So is this place, he said, looking around. I saw the photos online, but being here, it's different. It's alive. I think we all are, she replied. He walked over to the mural, eyes tracing the outlines of the hands. Which one is yours? Asterisk, she stepped beside him and pointed to a hand near the center. It was etched with a small vinous symbol of resilience. That one, still growing. Asterisk, he turned to her, more serious now. You've built something incredible, and I just want to say again, I'm proud of you. Asterisk, she took his hand, squeezed it. I'm proud of you too, for showing up. Asterisk, there was a pause. Then Marcus said, Vivian wants to host a women's circle here next month, for moms and daughters. She says she owes it to you to help nurture what you've planted. Asterisk, Margot raised her brows. That might be the most surprising news of the week. Asterisk, she's trying. She sees things differently now. Maybe it took all this for us to really look at what matters. Asterisk, I'm glad, she said. Tell her she's welcome to use the space, as long as she brings her real self, not her curated one. She will, he smiled. They sat together for a while, watching the fire dim and the candlelight flicker. In the windows, there were no heavy conversations this time, no apologies, just presence, and that, Margot thought, was enough. Asterisk, as the final cleanup finished and the doors were locked for the night, Margot took one last walk through the hearth room. She touched the back of each chair, said silent thanks to every story shared, every soul brave enough to show up. She whispered a quiet blessing into the air. Not because she believed it changed anything supernatural, but because she knew intention mattered. Asterisk, outside, the drizzle had stopped and a faint moon glowed through the clouds. The grass glistened, and the roses she had planted weeks ago stood tall, heavy with raindrops, but unbowed. Asterisk, Margot stood there, her shawl hugging her tightly, her breath fogging in the cool air. She didn't need to go back to who she used to be. That woman was strong, yes, but this woman, this version of herself, born from heartbreak, courage, and clarity, was something altogether new. Asterisk, she had turned exclusion into invitation. Asterisk, silence into story, loneliness into legacy. And as she looked at the hearthroom, now filled with echoes of laughter and pain, with truths spoken aloud and lives joined in kindness, Margot Hensley knew this chapter was not the end of her transformation. It was the beginning. The morning light slipped through the sheer curtains of Margot Hensley's bedroom like golden threads weaving a new day. She awoke not to the bitter memories of what had been taken from her, but to the quiet affirmation of what she had reclaimed. There was no heaviness in her chest, no sharp pangs of exclusion, only a calm awareness that her story had shifted from silence to sovereignty. The hearthroom was no longer an idea, and neither was she. Her presence had become unwavering and unmistakably her own. Asterisk, it had been 3 weeks since the launch of the hearthroom, and word had spread beyond their small town. Stories of the venue where every guest was welcome, where mothers weren't forgotten, and where healing wasn't a side effect but the main offering, had drawn attention. A regional magazine had written an article titled "The Venue That Heals: How One Woman Rewrote the Rules of Family Spaces." The response was overwhelming. Letters, emails, even visits from strangers who had read her story and seen themselves in her journey. Asterisk, Margot read them each morning over her tea, sometimes with tears, sometimes with laughter. A widow from Maine who hadn't spoken to her son in 10 years wrote to say she was flying out to surprise him for his birthday, inspired by Margot's courage. A woman in her 30s said she finally told her fiancé she wouldn't walk down the aisle unless her estranged father was invited. Another shared how she started a mother's writing group in her town, calling it the Hearth Circle. Asterisk, but amid the accolades and the newfound recognition, Margot remained grounded. She still tended to her garden. She still hosted Saturday soup nights for a handful of neighbors. She still kept Charles's old sweater neatly folded at the foot of her bed, because even with all the changes, some things, the things that made her who she was, had never left. Asterisk, on a cool Thursday afternoon, Marcus called. His voice was lighter than usual. Asterisk, Mom, are you free this Sunday? Asterisk, Margot tilted her head. Why? Are you bringing me more sandwiches and flowers? Asterisk, he laughed. No flowers this time, but Vivian and I are hosting a dinner, just the three of us, at our place. Asterisk, her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Really? Asterisk, yes, no big family affair, no pretending, just a quiet dinner, to talk, connect. She said she wants to make the effort, and I think it's time. Asterisk, Margot hesitated for a moment, her mind revisiting the pain of being uninvited, unseen. but then she inhaled and exhaled slowly. That version of herself, the one who waited by the phone, wondering if she mattered, was no longer in charge. I'd like that, she said. What time? 6. Or something nice but not a state honor level intimidating. She smiled. I'll try to tone it down. When Sunday arrived, Margot took her time getting ready. She wore a soft lavender dress with a floral scarf, understated earrings, and a quiet confidence. She didn't feel nervous. She felt prepared not just to be seen, but to see, to observe the woman her son had chosen, and to understand, not judge. Healing, she knew now, was not about forgetting pain. It was about not letting it steer the wheel. The drive to Marcus and Vivian's home was pleasant. The sky was pale pink, streaked with hints of orange as the sun dipped low. Their house was modest but la vie, white two-story with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that Vivian had clearly decorated with intention. As Margot walked up the stone path lined with lanterns, the front door opened. Vivian stood there, in a soft navy sweater and jeans, her blonde hair pinned up, and her eyes warm, though slightly uncertain. Margot, she said, her voice open. Come in. Margot stepped inside and took in the smell of roasted rosemary chicken, freshly baked bread, and something sweet, possibly peach cobbler. Vivian gestured toward the dining table where 3 places were set. The centerpiece was simple, a vase of white tulips. Margot noticed the subtle nod. Marcus remembered. He emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and a grin. Dinner's just about ready. Want a glass of wine? Red, please, Margot said, settling into her chair. They began with small talk: weather, local news, the hearthroom updates. Vivian asked genuine questions about the community events, the renovation plans, and even offered to help plan an upcoming gathering for blended families. I've never really had to think about these things, she admitted. My family, we were always more about appearances than connections. I realize now how much I missed growing up. Margot appreciated the honesty. It's not easy to unlearn what we were taught to hide behind. Vivian nodded. I used to think strength was controlling everything. Now I see it's in letting things be messy, in listening. The meal was delicious, but it was the conversation that nourished more. They discussed difficult things without flinching. What happened with the wedding, the miscommunications, the assumptions that had hurt all of them. Vivian apologized again, not as a performance, but from a place of real understanding. I erased you, she said quietly, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Margot looked at her, the soft light of the chandelier catching the sincerity in her eyes. Thank you. That matters. After dinner, they moved to the porch with tea and cobbler. A soft wind rustled the trees, and the air was heavy with the scent of jasmine from the garden. They sat in a circle, no one above or below, just family, reshaped and realigned. At one point, Marcus leaned forward and asked, would you ever consider officiating a renewal ceremony here, at the estate? Margot raised her brows. You and Vivian. He nodded. We've talked about it. Something small, intentional, with you leading it, if you'd want to. She blinked, stunned. Not a minister. You're more than that, he said. You're a storyteller, a mother, a builder of spaces. We want the ceremony to mean something, not just look good on Instagram. Vivian nodded. You changed how we see commitment. We want our new beginning to start with the person who reminded us how to show up. Margot felt her throat tighten. Then yes, I'd be honored. The drive home that night was filled with silence, the kind that soothes, not stings. She rolled down her window and let the cool night air dance around her. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel gently, a quiet rhythm of gratitude. This wasn't the life she thought she'd have at 60. It was better, harder, yes, but truer. Back home, she poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and walked into her study. She opened her journal and wrote, I was once uninvited, forgotten, erased, but now I sit at the head of my own table, not in authority, but in truth, and I welcome others to join, not because I demand it, but because I've created space, real space, the kind that doesn't judge, the kind that listens, the kind that remembers. She closed the journal and looked around the room. The walls, the shelves, the faint ticking of the clock, they all bore witness to her transformation. She had not sought revenge. She had not screamed for attention. She had rewritten the story with quiet, radical grace, and the world, slowly but surely, had begun to listen. The morning of the renewal ceremony dawned clear and golden, the sky stretching wide over the hawthorn, a state with a brilliance that seemed almost deliberate, as if the sun itself had RSVP'd to witness something sacred. Margot Hensley stood before the mirror in her upstairs study, her reflection calm but quietly radiant. She wore a soft champagne-colored dress with a high neckline and lace-trimmed sleeves. A simple brooch rested on her collarbone, initials engraved on its back. Her silver hair was swept elegantly into a loose chignon, the kind that said she belonged here, not as a guest, but as a force. Downstairs, the hearthroom buzzed gently with final preparations. A dozen chairs were arranged in a circle of intention beneath the large floral arch, now permanently installed by the window. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, scattering amber and rose-colored light across the hardwood floor. Tulips and gardenias, Margot's and Vivian's favorites, lined the edge of the ceremony space. There were no towering flower walls, no photographers with staged backdrops, only authenticity. That had been Margot's rule. Vivian had arrived early, wearing a flowing ivory dress with a simple ribbon in her hair. She looked nothing like the woman who had once orchestrated a wedding meant to exclude. Today, she looked like someone who had learned what it meant to honor complexity, not erase it. Marcus stood by her side, his suit understated, his eyes luminous with calm reverence. He hadn't stopped smiling since Margot entered the room. Guests were few, no more than 20. Close friends, a few family members. Theo, the estate manager, stood quietly in the back, as did Tessa Callahan, who had now become Margot's assistant. In running the venue, even Mrs. Callahan herself had come, her cane tapping lightly as she walked to the front row. When everyone was seated, Marcus stepped forward and cleared his throat. Today, he began, isn't about starting over. It's about honoring the parts of our journey that were painful, flawed, and beautiful. It's about returning to the heart of things, and the heart of our story changed the day we remembered who we had forgotten. He turned, extended a hand toward Margot, my mother, who taught me how to be present, even after I turned away. The room turned toward her as she rose and stepped forward. She didn't need notes. Every word came from her soul. We often think of beginnings as clean slates, she said, but real beginnings are messy. They carry history, shadows, echoes. What makes them beautiful is not their perfection, but our willingness to show up in them anyway. She looked at Marcus, then at Vivian. When you asked me to officiate this ceremony, I was stunned, not because I didn't believe in your love, but because, for so long, I believed I had been erased from it. But real love is not tidy. It doesn't come with guarantees or perfect invitations. It asks us to be brave, to admit when we've failed, to choose connection over control, and to keep choosing it. She took a slow breath, her voice steady. Today, you are not just renewing your vows, you are acknowledging the people who shaped you, the lessons that cracked you open, and the courage it takes to begin again with fuller hearts. Vivian's eyes brimmed with tears, not of regret, but of gratitude. Margot stepped back. The couple exchanged vows, not rehearsed or memorized, but spoken directly from their hearts. Marcus promised to listen more, to protect Vivian's softness without controlling it. Vivian promised to make space not just for her own vision, but for the past and future of the man she loved. The room held its breath as they embraced, not with the passion of newlyweds, but with the knowing warmth of two people who had returned to each other through trial. When Margot pronounced them recommitted in presence and purpose, the applause was gentle, intimate, a soft rising wave of approval and emotion. After the ceremony, the gathering moved to the back patio where a long table had been set under a canopy of flowering vines. Candles flickered in glass jars, and trays of food from local vendors filled the air with aramelum and roasted vegetables, grilled salmon, fresh baked bread, and spiced apple cake. It was the kind of meal meant for sharing, not impressing. Margot sat between Marcus and Vivian, occasionally rising to greet guests, answer questions, or refill teacups. She moved through the crowd with grace, no longer just the mother of the groom, but the founder of something larger. A movement, a reimagining. As dusk settled over the estate, the guests drifted into smaller circles of laughter and storytelling. Children played tag along the garden paths. Elderly couples sipped cider under lanterns. The hearthroom remained open, its lights soft and golden, a sanctuary even amid the joy. Asterisk Marcus pulled Margot aside beneath the old willow tree at the edge of the property. Asterisk, I don't think I've ever told you this, he said, but when I was a kid, I used to believe you had magic. Asterisk, she raised an eyebrow. Oh, asterisk, yeah, he chuckled. You always seemed to know what I needed before I said it. A snack after a hard day, a hug when I pretended I didn't want one. Even when I grew distant, part of me always thought, she'll find a way. And you did. Asterisk, Margot smiled. It wasn't magic, Marcus. It was love. Asterisk, I know that now, he said. And I want you to know something else. We're thinking of starting a family soon. Asterisk, her eyes widened. Really? Asterisk, he nodded. We're not rushing. But when it happens, I want you there for all of it. No more sidelines. No more silence. Asterisk, she took his hand and squeezed it. Then let it begin now. Asterisk, they walked back to the gathering together, their silhouettes outlined by the soft glow of garden lights. The evening wore on with music. An acoustic trio played gentle melodies as guests swayed, talked, and basked in the warmth of a space built not for spectacle, but for sincerity. Asterisk, near midnight, after the last guest departed, Margot stood alone, in the hearthroom. She walked slowly through the quiet space, her heels echoing softly against the wooden floor. The mural of hands on the wall caught her gaze again, and she smiled, tracing the vine on her own symbolic hand with a fingertip. Asterisk, she sat by the fire, watching the flames crackle. Her thoughts drifted not to the past, not to the pain, but to the future, to the stories yet to be told, the rooms yet to be filled, the lives that would walk through these doors and find what she had fought so hard to create, belonging. Asterisk, there would be hard days again. That was life. There would be disappointments, misunderstandings, maybe even losses. But now she had a compass, a place, a voice that didn't falter or ask for permission. Asterisk, she had become her own invitation. Asterisk, and for every woman who had been left out, who had been labeled too much or not enough, Margot Hensley had opened a door. She had not just bought a venue. She had bought back her power. Asterisk, as she stood to leave, she glanced once more at the room glowing gently behind her. Asterisk, tomorrow, a grief support group would meet here for the first time. Asterisk, next week, a birthday celebration for a girl with no extended family. Asterisk, and in 2 months, a wedding for a couple both rejected by their families, who had asked Margot personally to bless their union. Asterisk, the hearth room would continue. So would she. Asterisk, outside, the wind whispered through the trees, rustling the roses she had planted from her own garden. She paused, reached down, and plucked a single bloomer, creamy white flower flecked with soft pink at the edges. She brought it to her nose, inhaled the scent, and smiled. No longer waiting, no longer erased. She was the mother of the groom. The keeper of the hearth. Asterisk, and the author of her own ending, one that didn't close but opened, again and again and again. Asterisk.